Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
You just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're going to lose. Coming down the stretch, you're going to lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here as we discuss our number 4 team, the Illinois Fighting Illini. Astute listeners will have noticed that by now that we skipped number 5, which Rod has penciled in for Michigan State. As always, the Spartans will be our season finale for our preseason analysis, where we'll take our usual very, very deep dive. We've already been getting entries for the Beat Rod competition, so be sure yours is in as well, and see if you can do a better job predicting the order of the Big Ten this year, 1 through 18. Send along your name and picks, along with the tiebreaker of Michigan State scoring points against Michigan and their 2 games this season, to me, Eric, at tffinots.com. All right, let's talk about the Illini, but I will refuse my friend's request and insistence that we open with the Lord's Prayer or any other nonsense about this team. Also, I really don't particularly care for Orange. Last year, Illinois had kind of everything break the right way, which was the opposite of the previous season. They ended up with including the portal additions, they went 29-9, 14-6 in the Big Ten, won the Big Ten tournament, and then even went all the way to the Elite Eight, which is the deepest run they've had in March since the title game in 2005. And got the monkey off the back for postseason play with Brad Underwood, similar to Matt Painter, who we'll talk about in a couple episodes from now. So the Illini finally made good postseason on what they've been did in the regular season. The reasons for that were kind of obvious with Terrance Shannon, but certainly they're keyed by the number 3 overall offensive efficiency number, which tied the 05 team, which also explained their success in the NCAA tournament. It was also remarkable because they didn't really have a point guard, and that was something that we expected would be a hindrance for them. But they played sort of an NBA kind of style game, hunted for matchup advantages, and exploited them. And, I guess with a different roster, which we'll go through in just a little bit, questions, can you repeat that? But certainly Brad Underwood showed his coaching mettle, I guess, last year.
Well, look, I've been very critical of Brad Underwood over his tenure at Illinois, but you gotta play it straight. You got to be fair and objective as best as you can. And objectively speaking, he had a really good year.
Yeah,
I did not think it was remotely possible for Illinois to do what they did offensively last season. I thought the lack of a point guard would prove to be a huge hindrance and limiter on what their offense could be. And not only was it not any of those things, they actually made it work to have one of the best offenses in the country. I mean, number 3 overall is outstanding. As you said, it tied their 05 team, which I think those of us who remember that team know was a truly great offensive basketball team. And this group also ranked as high as that one did in its particular year. Pretty remarkable, and really a bolt out of the blue from my perspective, because I didn't see it coming. What made it work was what you alluded to. They really they moved to what I would call, and I heard Underwood reference it this way as well, a very NBA influenced offensive approach, where the whole idea was to find physical mismatches. And it could be either way. It could be where they would get Coleman Hawkins or Terrance Shannon being guarded by a smaller player and kind of back them down, look to get them near the rim and take advantage of size edge. Or it could be situations where Illinois had a speed edge. If you remember that first game that Michigan State played against Illinois in Champaign, I won't forget it. MSU tried and I can't remember who team Illinois had played previous to MSU was that had guarded Ty Rodgers with a center. The theory being, well, Ty Rodgers can't shoot.
Right.
He can't shoot jumpers. So guard him with a bigger player. You don't have to worry about extending out on the floor, because if he wants to take 15 to 20-foot jumpers, fine, let him. The problem was, in that game, Michigan State tried to approach it the same way, and he just torched Michigan State going to the rim. It was impressive. And again, I don't like doing it because I don't really find Underwood a particularly likable character, but you got to give him his due. He looked at that team, he looked at the personnel he had, and he managed to find a way to play basketball offensively that fit what he had perfectly and minimized the negative impact of what he didn't have, notably a true point guard, floor leader, orchestrator, creator. So hats off to him. And then that all translated in March for the first time under Underwood, as you mentioned. They get all the way to the Elite Eight. Were pretty clearly, I think, the second best team in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Pretty decent gap, I think, between Purdue and Illinois, but they were the second best team in the league, I think, pretty definitively. So a great season, but as has also been the case in Underwood's tenure, they're undergoing yet again a massive roster overhaul. 2 years ago, he brought in a bunch of guys from the portal, and it didn't work at all. There were chemistry problems, just fit problems in general. Last year, brought in a bunch of guys via the portal. It couldn't have worked better.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes this year, because he's yet again in the same position. He's really going to have to do it with a largely new group of players.
It's a state now where it's almost like free agent basketball a lot of times, but without any sort of stable core that you have in a lot of these teams. And I don't think this is, at least my impression is not exactly how Underwood wants to do it. He wants to recruit and have a foundation, and then you add portal pieces to fill in the holes or, augment places that you need it. But he's just never been able to get to that point now. And I almost wonder if he'll ever will, if it's either nature of just his program, him. I mean, I don't know, but it's working right now, but it's just tough.
It can become a self-perpetuating sort of deal, right? I as opposed to some other schools, like, for example, a program like Alabama has shown no hesitation to just go ahead and recruit over guys.
Right.
Like Nate Oates will go after guys in the portal who play the same position that guys he's already got on the roster and who haven't left at that point will play. And he'll just do that. I haven't really noted Underwood doing that, but it is interesting that he hasn't been able to hold on to guys better than he has. And I don't just mean guys that are hot properties in the portal, which we'll talk about in this a little later in this preview, but guys that he recruited out of high school.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not doing his retention percentage is horrific in terms of his high school guys, guys that he recruited there, maybe do a year, maybe two, and then they almost invariably end up leaving. It's really, and I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he's proven to be a tough guy to play for. I haven't gotten that sense particularly, but it could be the case. You don't know whether it's some of that or that people feel like promises haven't been kept, or they are concerned about being recruited over. It could be a host of things. Who knows? But, one of the reasons, and we've talked about it in regard to some other programs in the Big Ten prior to this, one of the things that sometimes drives players leaving is NIL commitment, right?
Right.
For the most part, you don't hear that problem with Illinois. In fact, their NIL has been cited as a positive in terms of their ability to attract players in the portal.
Yeah, I would expect that.
So you would think that it wouldn't be the issue in retaining players. And I suspect it's something else or a few something else's that are leading to that.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to the players departing as Illinois cleans house. If you need your house clean or your windows clean, make sure your first call is the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. If you're in the Grand Rapids area, and that's a wide area, give Troy and his team a call. You can find the ways to reach them at our support page at thefinalfoursontheschedule.com/support. There you can get an estimate, get 15% off any services by the Squeegee Squad. They take care of residential, commercial, high rises. They clean the state capitol's windows. I know I've mentioned it many times. But if you want to be able to see clearly out your windows and make your windows a menace to birds, call the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. They'll be the ones who can help take care of you. The first player, Terrance Shannon, is obviously the most important. I believe, before I get into it, he was there the year before too, right? So he's one of those players he's one of those retention portal players that Underwood has managed to keep on to. So 6'7" wing, an interesting season, off to a great start. He's obviously a really good player, but strange things happening off season. He was charged, or there were allegations of sexual assault in Lawrence, Kansas, which were kind of weird. So because of the code of conduct at the University of Illinois, he was suspended. Illinois was certainly struggled without him on the court, and it looked like their season was going to be sort of go down in the dwindles, what it looked like a promising season to begin with. But he was found not guilty. Then he returned to the team, ended up missing 6 games, still averaged 23 points a game, 4 rebounds a game. And so he shot 48, 36, and 80, averaged 8.6 free throw attempts per game. I mean, he was really good. He was a dominant player. When you get close to the rim, there's just no stopping him. And he was instrumental for their season, both in the regular season and then also the postseason.
Yeah, and just a word on those legal troubles. I just saw, I think it was yesterday, that he's suing. I think he's suing the police department
in Lawrence.
Yeah,
he should.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like it was all weird.
Yeah, and that whole deal, he took a ton of heat. Illinois took some heat when he came back, although honestly, there was nothing they could do. He successfully got an injunction against enforcement of the suspension by the school. None of this was Underwood's decision. It was out of his hands. And, of course, there's always the leap to assume that an allegation is a fact. And this one should serve as one more reminder that it's not.
Right.
It's merely
an allegation.
Yeah. And so by all accounts, everything I've seen, this was an unjust prosecution of Terrance Shannon. And, the next time you have one of these come up in the public sphere, keep it in mind before jumping on a bandwagon of making assumptions as to what really goes on. You don't know. Sometimes the person absolutely is going to be guilty, but you don't know. The on the court stuff, look, he had a year, I mentioned in the notes, 9 years out of 10, Terrance Shannon last year would have been MVP of the Big Ten. He just happened to be doing it in a year where Zach Edey was around, and thus he didn't win it.
Right.
But the shooting was great. I mean, for a non-center to average almost 9 free throw attempts a game is phenomenal. And it tells you what kind of weapon he was, because he was a good enough jump shooter that teams had to guard him. You couldn't just let him take wide open shots. And if you got up and guarded him on the perimeter, he had a good enough handle and then really nice athleticism and strength to either finish at the rim or draw contact at the rim. And the bottom line was he was a machine for them, and obviously a big loss as he decided to go to the NBA.
Yeah, very smart decision on his part. Obviously, he's ready, and not much more to do at college at this point. Moving on to Marcus Damask. He was a great portal addition they got out of Southern Illinois, 6'5" wing. Averaged 15.9 points a game, 5 rebounds a game, 3.9 assists per game, shot 45, 30, and 87. And he was sort of the go-to guy once Shannon was off the team. And he was really good. I think Michigan State handled him okay in the second matchup, but he was definitely one of the best forces on their team besides Shannon.
He was, I think, clearly the biggest addition to the roster, and I would argue probably the best portal addition in the conference, because he transformed how they played from the year prior, and it's, so you look at a guy like Matthew Mayer, not exactly the same, not really the same kind of player at all, but comparable in some ways in terms of quote unquote talent to someone like Domask, but one fit horribly with what Illinois needed and one fit seamlessly. And it shows you the difference. Domask was really a key in my view, in allowing Illinois' offense to function as well as it did without having that true playmaker, because they could play through him. They could also play through Shannon and through Hawkins as well. They were fortunate that a lot of their non-guards were actually guys you could play through, but Domask was a really tough guard because he could find people. He wasn't a great jump shooter, but good enough. You had to respect him. And he was big enough and strong enough that if you tried to guard him with a smaller player, that was going to prove to be a problem. So very, very key addition for them, and had a great year.
So the next one is a little bit of strange departure. That was not expected, I guess, is Coleman Hawkins. He averaged 12.1 points a game, 6.1 rebounds a game, a little over a block a game, shot 45, 37, and 79. And he was, finally this last year, he kind of got things together where he wasn't making quite as many boneheaded mistakes, and he was handling the ball well and passing well. I think the assumption was he's going to go to the NBA. I think he sort of tested the waters a little bit and realized he needed another year. But instead of going back to Champaign, he ends up in Kansas State in Manhattan. So a sort of weird departure. And again, like you talked before, the assumption is the NIL situation is great at Illinois. So just a weird sort of outcome in this. And, maybe I suppose the Illinois insiders may have more on this, but yeah, I guess it's the way things are now.
It was, and what was stranger about it still is that it just was kind of accepted that this is what was going to happen. And in fact, it did, that he left. And I don't understand why. I don't get the sense there was any kind of, sometimes, as Michigan State fans know, you do 4 years with a guy, and just between coach and player, you just kind of reach the end of the road, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Like everybody understands, okay, it's best that your last year, best for everybody, you do it somewhere else. Didn't get the sense that was the case with Hawkins and Underwood. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm not under that impression. He finally made good on his potential. For 3 years, you could see what he might be able to become if he would just find some consistency. And then finally, Hawkins managed to do that, had a great senior season, but he's going to be at Kansas State. I can't explain it.
Yeah, it's not like Kansas State is a power side. They were, they beat, everyone remembers, of course, the game 2 years ago. They beat Michigan State in the tournament. They were everyone's darling. Last year, they didn't make the tournament with their, the portal additions didn't work. So I don't know, very, very weird. Moving on to Quincy Guerrero, 6'7" forward. He averaged 9.6 points a game, 6.1 rebounds a game, shot 48, 37, and 57. He came from Oregon, and a solid player.
Yeah, he was, again, a really nice addition for them. Not a superstar, but to give them a guy who could play some small ball four, shot, and also played a little bit on the wing at times too. He shot well enough that he was a threat. He was a very good rebounder for a 6'7" guy, not a huge guy. Solid defensively. I mean, there just were not. He filled some gaps that Illinois needed filled, and that was did that while not bringing negatives with him. So I mentioned Matthew Mayer the year before. Mayer played a lot of four, very talented guy, but he clearly wanted a certain role in the offense, and sometimes his shot selection was a negative for Illinois. Sometimes his defensive attention to detail was a negative. You didn't have those problems here, and that was a difference. a positive one for them.
Next departing player, Justin Harmon. He was a 6'5" wing, averaged 5.6 points a game on 41, 31, and 92 shooting, playing 19 minutes a game.
Yeah, he was a nice, 1-year addition for them. Solid player on the wing. Again, gave him a little bit of shooting, gave him a lot of size. Nice piece.
And now moving on to some more transfer departures. Luke Goody, 6'6" wing, averaged 5.7 points a game, 3.6 rebounds a game, shot 40, 39, 65. A guy who was injured, at least both his first years at Illinois, with a lot of promise, kind of came through last year, and he's heading to Indiana now.
Yeah, again, so he does 3 years there. The first 2 were to some extent limited by injury. He had shown potential to be this, but injuries limited how much of a contribution he would actually make. Last year he stayed mostly healthy and made good on it. He's an interesting guy because he's proven to be a very reliable shooter. But unlike a lot of guys, when you think a 6'6" wing who's a shooter, oftentimes that player tends to pretty much just be that, and they're not giving you contributions elsewhere. Mm-hmm. The thing that I like about Goody is he is tough. He's tough. He's physical. He can rebound a little bit. He can defend. He's not just a shooter. He can give you other things as well. And his MO sort of belies the normal profile you associate with a guy with his offensive game. But as you say, he's going to finish out his career at IU, not at UI.
Another transfer who came in for 2 years and is now leaving is Dane Danger, 6'9", postman, averaged 6.1 points a game, 3.6 rebounds a game, playing only 11 minutes a game, but his role got bigger and smaller throughout the year. Sort of just kind of was, as far as I could tell, it almost seemed sort of random, sort of how much he played. But he was a very good poster level threat, 67% from the floor shooting, but had just his problems on the defensive end. He's going to end up going to Memphis and play for Hardaway.
Yeah, this is another one where I will give Brad Underwood credit because Danger played a lot more 2 years ago, double the minutes the year prior as a sophomore as opposed to last year. And Danger can do things. As a low post offensive player, he is legit. He and I may have said this somewhere recently, I'm having a sense of deja vu at thinking about it. He struck me as kind of a B- Nick Ward.
Yeah.
With all the same strengths and all the same weaknesses. Just the weaknesses are a little weaker, the strengths not quite as strong. But very similar in terms of his profile. I guess I said that about Zed Key. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, right.
But Danger is another example of this. And to Underwood's credit, I think as he got into last season, he realized I've got to do something differently here because I can't keep getting exploited. If you remember, he did, 3 years with Kofi Coburn in the middle, and it was a similar thing. Now, Coburn was a dominant offensive player, but defensively, it was a real problem for Illinois because he could not extend. And Danger is a similar sort of deal, except not as dominant offensively. So I think it proved to be the right move to reduce Danger's role. But you could see this coming. I mean, I know we talked about it on the podcast. I was calling this in January that this was going to happen. So it was not a surprise. And at Memphis, if they can live with the way he defends, he could put up good numbers. It's just I actually, again, I give credit to Underwood for this because it couldn't have been easy to do. Anytime you've got a guy that you look at and think, if I play this kid 25 minutes a night, I'm going to get 13, 14 points minimum. That's hard to give up, but it was the right move. It made Illinois a better team.
Well, we've talked about it before too. So there's some players that there's a certain amount of minutes, and once you get beyond that, it's the sort of diminishing returns. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So he's definitely a guy who
could
insert for 5 minutes or something. He could really make a huge impact in the game. Then moving on to Imani Hansberry, 6'8" freshman post player, averaged 2.4 points a game, 2.1 rebounds a game in 18 games. He's heading out to West Virginia.
Again, I don't quite understand it because although he didn't play a huge role last year, I think that was kind of understood. He likely wouldn't. but they seem to really like his potential for the future, and yet he's one and done and leaves the program. I don't know.
And following him is Sincere Harris, 6'3" guard. Showed promise too a couple years ago, got hurt, didn't play much last season, and he's going to also go to West Virginia.
Yeah, and again, 2 years ago, I think he did show promise. He did show potential to develop into something. Was hurt last year. They kept him, but he was hurt last year, didn't play. Now he opts to leave. So again, it's retention of guys. It's a strange thing.
And finally, Nicolo Moretti, 6'2" point guard. Didn't really get much as far as playing time, so he's going to head on to Florida Atlantic.
Well, look, the bottom line is, if he was a guy they believed capable of handling that role at the Big Ten level, he would have done it because they needed one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so then let's talk about returning players, which there are only two. So it's actually a pretty short segment. This is brought to you by Nudge Printing. Nudge Printing is where you should get all your Spartan gear, whether it's football, basketball, volleyball, or any other sports. They have vintage gear. They have modern ones. They have hats now that they've providing, and they're custom made, super cool. Check out all their stuff at finalfours.schedule.com/support to find a link to their page, or just go to nudgeprinting.com and browse their entire selection. They also have other teams available, and all super high quality shirts and apparel. They're, again, always, as I always say, they're the favorite of my family. I wear them all the time. My family loves wearing them, whether they're working out or whether they're just walking around the house. So Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. Brittany and Gabe, fantastic Spartans, even better business owners. So support them as they are out in Portland, Michigan, and support another Michigan small business. All right, so returning players, Ty Rogers, 6'7" junior forward, and this will be his third year. So, I mean, he's close to being the first person to graduate and come in under Brad Underwood at Illinois. Yeah. So maybe he'll be the one. And as you mentioned before, he was very good. He playing a position which is not his natural position, playing point guard. He averaged 6.2 points a game, 5.3 rebounds a game, along with 2 assists per game. Shot 53% from the floor, 59% from the line. And I don't need to even try a three-pointer, but because
I don't think so.
Because he's not good. So, I mean, that's all from attacking the basket. As you mentioned, he just completely destroyed Michigan State in the matchup in Champaign.
I've got to, again, give Underwood some credit, because in the preseason, he talked about Ty Rogers as his point guard. And I just thought, he's going to destroy this kid. Ty Rogers is a good player, and he's a smart player in many ways, but he's not a point guard. He's never played point guard at any level that I've seen, and I've seen him play AAU. I've seen him play high school. Never saw him as a point guard. The reality is, he wasn't a point guard for Illinois. Sure. They would use him to bring the ball up, but that's a different thing. Then, they'd get into offense, and it would usually be some other guy who was initiating the offense. But Rogers had a really good year. I mean, there are obviously things he cannot do. He's not most notably jump shooting. He is just not a jump shooter. He likely will never be a good enough shooter to be more than a complimentary scorer. But if you take that off the table and you look at the things that he can do, he's an extremely good and an extremely versatile defensive player. He is a physical presence. He can rebound. He's proven to actually be a pretty effective finisher around the rim when he does take shots. And he's reasonably good off the dribble if you're going to give him an opportunity to take the ball to the basket against you. So he has emerged as pretty much the player I thought he would be coming out of high school. And he was a guy Michigan State was all in on recruiting. It was going to be an uphill battle because of some familial reasons, but I had really hoped Michigan State was somehow going to be able to pull it off, because I looked at Ty Rogers as the kind of player that Izzo has frequently had as part of his teams, where they're not doing anything eye-popping, but they're going to make a number of winning plays in every game. And that is what Ty Rogers has become. He can't be your primary guy. He probably can't even be your second or third scorer. But if he's in the lineup surrounded by other guys who can do those things, and you're just going to ask him to go out, guard people, rebound, give you the occasional basket, and just do smart things, make winning plays, play hard, play smart basketball. He can do those things.
Yeah.
And most championship level teams need a guy like that. So he has a lot of value, despite the fact that he may never be a double-digit scorer in any given year that he plays.
Yeah, and for a team that had other options from outside shooting, you didn't need his shooting, and so you can have a
Right.
guy play
That's it.
out of position,
Yeah.
essentially, right? I mean, he's playing a guard, but
Yep.
he's a 6'7" guard who can guard guards, and
Yep.
he can rebound, and so he's very valuable in that sense.
Absolutely.
That's kind of
Absolutely.
brings the question. Let's imagine he was at Michigan State. Where does he play? Because does he play the wing? Because the wing generally is someone who can shoot and like the transition. I mean, he couldn't do
No.
that. So I mean, I guess we got Cohen Carr right now, who sort of fits into this not jump shooting 6'7" athletic guy.
Some recruiting decisions would have been different if he'd committed, and I think he probably would have been mostly a 4
Sure.
at
Okay.
Michigan State. That's how I saw him. And that's the way I thought about him. I thought about him, not that he's exactly the same player by any means, but somebody like a BJ Dawson
Mm-hmm.
is a good comparison point. BJ Dawson was never going to be a primary scorer because he couldn't really shoot. But that didn't mean that he wasn't a critical guy on those teams he played on. He was very important because of what he could do on the defensive end, what he could do as a rebounder, and that he could just offensively slot in, and maybe he sets a good pick, or he's able to keep a possession alive with an offensive rebound. It was dirty work kind of stuff on offense. And then the other things he was extremely good at and extremely versatile as well. And that's how I kind of saw Ty Rodgers coming out of high school. That's what I thought his role would be. And it has panned out that way. And I think it would have been largely the same at Michigan State. I mean, some of the particulars might have been slightly different in terms of how he would be utilized, but by and large, I think he would have been the same kind of guy at MSU.
And then the second returning player, Dre Gibbs Lahorn, 6'1" sophomore, averaged 2.4 points a game in 7 minutes, shot 34, 22, and 67.
Yeah, it was a struggle for him, which was not a surprise. He was not expected to be the kind of freshman who could just bulldoze his way into a major role. He played sparingly. The good news for him is, with as much roster turnover as there's a clear opportunity available, but he's got to prove to be able to seize it. So we'll see if he can do that.
All right, then as we move to newcomers, just a reminder that the brothers at Just Do Gutters, they can take care of all your gutter work. They can make sure, especially in this time of the fall, make sure get all those leaves out of the gutter. They can come out and just clean them out, or they can put the leaf guards on so you no longer have to clean them out yourself and get on that ladder. They'll get on that ladder for you. They can also repair gutters, downspouts, whatever might be broken. They can also replace entire sections, the entire section, whatever you need. They can do it. They can, great pricing, 10% off if you get your estimate through them, through our website, and mention Final Four. Go to the Final Four is now the schedule.com/support. You can find links to get a hold of either Kurt or Greg on the east or west side of the state. They will take care of you, and they'll do fantastic work. You won't regret it, and you won't have that water in your basement. All right, so it looks like Illinois is pretty much gone to Europe for a lot of the players. We're going to start with newcomer Kasparas Jackucionis, a 6'6" freshman guard from Lithuania. He comes from FC Barcelona, played for the B team last year, and he's a potential first-round draft pick for the in the NBA. And I've been told by my friend multiple times that this is the guy who's going to do it for him this year.
Well, he is the highest profile guy they've added, and has received pretty much unanimously high grades for those who have witnessed him. As you mentioned, he comes from Barcelona. He played for their B team last year. He's seen as a guy who's a very possible first rounder. I would hesitate to say lock, but seen as more likely than not. It's interesting they were able to get him because it wasn't even a certainty that he'd play college basketball. It will also be interesting to see how he fits in. I think he's probably going to have the ball in his hands a lot. They're going to be very different than they were last year because they've actually added some guys who can play the point. He's one of them. The word on him is that he's a good shooter, maybe not a great one, but that he's an excellent playmaker. Obviously, with size at 6'6", that's a big advantage. I think it's clear he's likely to start, and he could give this team, a dimension they didn't really have last year at that position. So, the expectations are high for Jackucionis, no question.
So moving a little further south in Europe, we go from the Baltic states down to Slavic states, I guess, down by Greece, into Tomislav Ivicic, 7-footer, 230-pound freshman from Croatia. His brother played at Kentucky, and he is, by all reports, ready to go. He shot 41% from three in Europe last year, so he's kind of that classic European big man who's got the outside shooting.
Yeah, the expectation, as I gather, it seems to be that he's ready to go offensively. So great size, can also stretch the floor from three. That's a nice combination. The knock on him is he's not particularly athletic. So I think that again might play out as an issue for Illinois on the defensive end if they're forced to really play him more exclusively in drop coverage. That could create issues. But another very important addition because they needed to bring in some size and playable size, and they seem to have that.
And then speaking of size, we got Kerry Booth, 6'10" sophomore transfer from Notre Dame. He averaged 6.4 points a game, 4.3 rebounds a game in about 20 minutes playing for the Irish. Shot 39, 30, and 63. And so he's a guy who's either 4 or 5, I guess. I suppose depends on the personnel on the floor.
Yeah, still kind of an issue with strength, needing to continue to add some. But that height at 6'10" gives him a chance to at least maybe give them some spot minutes at center. I think more often he'll play the 4. They'd like to see a little more consistency with the deep shot to really give them a reliable stretch element there. But I'm expecting Booth to be a key reserve at both the 4 and the 5.
And then one of those guards you're talking about who's came in is Kylan Boswell, averaging 9.6 points a game, 3.6 assists per game, shot 40, 38, and 80 while playing for the Wildcats in Arizona last season.
Yeah, and so he's coming home. He's from Champaign originally. And a very important addition, no question, because it's taken what was a non-existent factor for Illinois a year ago and turned it into what looks like could be a strength, which is having multiple guys who are truly capable of running the offense at a high level. I mean, Boswell has done it for a very good program already, a very good high major program. So I also expect him to step right into the starting lineup. The shooting numbers are solid. That's a big help. That he should give them some floor stretching ability out there. And again, he's proven to be capable of running an offense.
Yeah, and definitely the shooting numbers from Arizona, you don't worry about him whether he can at the high level. If those numbers will translate, there's every reason to believe they would. So then we go to Trey White, 6'7" forward, averaged 12.3 points a game and 5.9 rebounds a game while playing for a lousy Louisville team. Shot 46, 30, and 75, and he started most of the season last year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what kind of role he slots into for Illinois because, again, Ty Rodgers is back, and you would imagine that he's going to be a starter again.
Sure.
You have Boswell, and
Jackucionis,
Jackucionis, and then the big center. So that's 4 spots really. So there is a wing spot available, but is that where Trey White will slot in? The numbers at Louisville, you've almost got to kind of disregard because it was for such a bad team. They don't mean much, but He started 29 times the year prior for USC, that USC team Michigan State beat in the tournament 2 years ago. And he was productive there in that role. So he has done it for a credible high major team. I think that, look, it can't be a bad thing for depth purposes, if nothing else, that you've added a guy like this. I just don't know whether I expect him to be like a 20-minute a night guy or 18 minutes or 27 minutes. I think that's what's at issue.
Sure. Then we have Jake Davis, 6'6" transfer from Mercer. He averaged 9 points a game, 4.5 rebounds a game in his freshman year with the Bears. He shot 42, 39, and 85.
Yeah, and I think he would seem a natural to sort of slot into the role that Goody was in last year. If he can maintain that kind of something close to that kind of shooting production. I don't know that I would expect him to be the total player that Goody was, but as a 6'6" guy who looks like he can knock down a three, there's a role for that available in Champaign. I'm just not sure yet how big the role is.
Sure. And then we have Ben Humricius, 6'9", 220-pound transfer from Evanston. He played 3 years at NIAIA Huntington College, where he averaged 14.7 points a game, 4.7 rebounds a game, and shot 48, 41, and 76 with a high volume of threes, almost 6 a game.
Yeah, and this guy's presence is the main reason why I'm a little bit hesitant on Trey White as a starter, because if Humricius starts, then I think Ty Rodgers is your starting 3. And I think that's probably how it goes. This is, again, another example of the state of affairs in 2024. So this guy goes from NAIA Huntington College, then does 1 year at Evanston, and now he's a very possible starter at Illinois. That's a remarkable progression, story arc in terms of his career. But I mean, you look at the numbers he put up at Evanston, the size, of course, makes him playable at the 4. I don't know about him defensively at this stage. You don't know enough to know if he'll be credible there or not. But man, a 6'9" guy who could go 41% from 3 and taking almost 6 of them a game, that's a dangerous player.
Yeah. And
Illinois can definitely use that kind of production in their front court. I mean, if you put this guy next to Ivisic, that could be your 4 and your 5 both as high volume 40% plus 3-point shooters. That sure makes it easier to have a Ty Rodgers out there, right?
Sure. Yeah, those are numbers that make Nate Oates drool. They're big guys from threes. Mariz Johnson's next, 6'9" freshman forward. He's just a recruit, so a non-transfer.
Yeah, and a highly regarded freshman as well. High motor big. He's very athletic. They think that will allow him to compete defensively right away, be a presence in transition, and they love his potential as a rebounder. Again, my only question is, how big is the available role for him? I think he'll play because he's a very talented guy and someone they're very high on, but how big is the role? That's the only question mark.
Another question about a role, I guess, in playing time is Will Riley, 6'8" forward who reclassified this year. He was a top 10 recruit in the previous 2025 class. And so, I guess the question always with the reclassified guys is, can they physically be ready to play when they get to the Big Ten?
Yeah. And it's funny because a guy who was ranked that highly, you would think it would be more definitive, but you look at their roster, you look at the composition of this team, and it's hard to see Riley slotting into a role where he's playing heavy minutes. Like I can't see a path to like 25 minutes a night. But can he play 15? There seems to be a division as to the view of that. But for right now, he's seen this guy who's maybe a little better on the perimeter, needs to get stronger before he can be a major inside presence. But I'm sure he's going to play some, much like Johnson will. I just don't know how much.
And finally, for new additions, Jason Jaxtis, 6'10" in-state freshman forward.
Yeah, and they see him as a guy who's got stretch capability as a stretch big, but needs to get much stronger. And again, you look at this roster, there does not seem to be any reason to play him a lot or at all early. So I think this is a developmental year for him.
Sure. So that brings us to the bottom part of this segment where we have to come up with who the other teams need to keep in the gutter, brought to you by the Brothers That Just Do Gutters. So this is a little bit more interesting. Who do you think is going to be the biggest person to worry about for Illinois next year?
Well, I'm gonna go with Jackucionis.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's my guess, and I take him based on the general reviews of his game, but also the fact he's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. That's always a nice advantage.
Absolutely. Yep. Based on rumors and innuendo. So we'll go on to finish up your overall for the Illini. Last year, a great season. They ended up in the Elite Eight, and but pretty much a brand new team as you go into this season. Lots of talent on paper. Whether everyone fits together and whether the guys from Europe, get along, I don't know. There's a lot of questions, as they are with about every team we talk about this year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, if you look at the talent level, for as much as we know, it appears to be fine. I mean, if the two European kids are as good as advertised, well, that's a big deal. We've seen Boswell play against Michigan State. We know he's a capable player. Some of the other, we've seen Trey White.
Mm-hmm.
So some of these guys are known from that perspective, and the ones who aren't, you still generally have a pretty good feel. This should be a team that doesn't have problems matching up with most of the rest of the league in terms of talent, but that doesn't necessarily mean much. That was true 2 years ago, and it didn't work so well. How they'll fit, how the pieces blend with each other, that's an open question, I think. I know what Ty Rodgers is. That's a known, but beyond that, you're just doing a ton of projection. And we've seen it work very well under this coaching staff, and we've seen it not work as well. Now, I think also interesting on that front, there have been rumors over the last few days that one of their assistants, Tim Anderson, who has been a key recruiting factor for them, among other things, he's the guy who's primarily responsible for Ty Rodgers ending up there, may be leaving. And the rumor is to Memphis. Penny Hardaway just fired his staff. So he's going to be replacing them with guys from somewhere. And supposedly the word is it may be Tim Anderson. If that happens, in the middle of September, is that any kind of factor in terms of getting this team to blend effectively and figure out how it wants to play? I don't know. I think this is a much more conventional looking team on paper, at least, than last year's group was. I think it's also got the potential to be a really good 3-point shooting team if the guys they're bringing in shoot to the level of expectation. So there's a chance this could still be a really good offensive team, just in a more conventional way than what we saw last season. They won't be as reliant upon hunting mismatches per se. But obviously I picked them fourth, so I've got some faith in the talent level and in Underwood's ability to blend all these new faces into a coherent squad. But as with most of the league this year, it is kind of a roll of the dice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, we're making assumptions based on, in some ways, not a ton of tangible evidence. In this case, it looks like a talented group. Underwood's proven to be able to blend a lot of new players quickly in the past. He's managed to pull that off at times. So for those reasons, I've got them fourth, but something considerably lower than this, very possible. Contending or even winning a Big Ten title, also possible.
Yeah. Well, and Underwood has had a lot of success in the Big Ten. I mean, even his down years, even the years would, you could sort of describe his team as a little dysfunctional. They're still very successful and, having a winning season in the Big Ten. So he has done well outside his first, year or two when he's sort of trying to get the program back on track after, in a wilderness with Gross. So he's done a really nice job, and I think a little bit like, sort of like Shrewsbury, been able to coach different ways in order to get the most out of his team.
Yeah, very true. He's had radically different teams year to year in terms of the strengths and weaknesses that his roster has had at his disposal, and he's been able, for the most part, to make it work with what he's had. So no reason to suspect he won't do that again this year, at least to some degree.
Right. And unrelated to this, but I mean, Penny Hardaway, how long is this guy going to last at Memphis? This team just, it's kind of surprising he's lasted as long as he has, just kind of having just weird teams and their performance not great.
Yeah, that's a good question.
All right, well, we'll leave it there. I want to remind everyone to check on out all our partners and sponsor the show. Head on over to the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. There you can find ways to reach the Brothers Just You Gutters, the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, or a link to find the Nudge Printing, where you get 20% off all your gear. They also are sponsoring the prize show or prize game with the Beat Rod contest. $100 of free apparel if you win that contest. So make sure you sign up for it. It is totally free. So until next time, we talk about the number 3 team. The Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.